Thank you. Hope now it works. At least it will in a second. Just to recap, I am a junior iOS developer, and I work for BBC Corporate Applications. Yesterday, a lot of people came to this stage to talk about how to improve your apps, how to make your code better, and I'm here to do the opposite. I'm here to talk about what not to do when you're creating an app Y component. Abigail actually beat me to this opening already, but luckily for you, we did a very different mistakes, so it's still on. So, let me introduce the project first, and then I will talk a bit about my mistakes. My first project at BBC Corporate Applications was to create feedback model, which we can use with different apps. Why we were creating it from scratch? Because we switched to AWS and GraphQL, so we needed to redesign the apps. Also, the old one was not working, so there's that. What I did, we decided to build it in SwiftUI using MVVM, so I started building it section by section. First the header, and then I moved to the context view. As you can see, it's a very simple view when you can click on a contact and then call or email a person. What I ran into is that I needed to let users know when something went wrong. For example, when we can't make a call, or if for some reason the number or email was not copied to clipboard. And I thought, yeah, good idea, we can use banners. What I did, I went to the BBC libraries and searched if we already designed a banner component. And lucky for me, we did, but it worked with UIKit. So it was not working for SwiftUI, and that's how I came to designing SwiftUI version of banner view. And what I do when I need to design something new in SwiftUI, obviously I Google. Because I'm definitely not the first person on earth who needs to create a banner view, and I would not be last person. I went through Stack Overflow, I read a few beautiful blog posts, and as a result, I created a very simple banner view which uses state variables to control the data for the banners, and when the data changes, the banners appears. Simple solution, looked very nice, and even worked, to a point. The moment when I had a parent view and the child view, I think everybody can guess where the banner will appear, not where it should, but inside the child view. That's how I ran in first time into the problem how to pass the data from the child view to parent view. But before we go to the solution, I want to iterate what I learned through this iteration of the project. First things first, I started looking for a solution before I understood the problem. Because I looked for the solution how to create a banner for one view. And I found the solution, right? And it even worked for a little bit. So if I stopped and thought a little bit before, it could save me some time. And I only tried to solve the solution to the problems that were right in front of me. I never considered where else I could use banners, and that probably for the project I will need to use them in a lot of different places. So that's the takeaways from the first iteration of the project. Second attempt to create a banner view went a bit better. I enlisted the help of my team. We brainstormed, we thought about how to pass the data from the subviews, how to pass the data through navigation stack, and we landed on one of the best practices there is for that, on dependency injection, and it actually worked pretty nicely. We created a simple banner manager that we initiated at the main view, and then it was possible to pass it down to the view model or to the view or anywhere you like. And this banner manager was controlling the data, which was controlling the banners, and it was single source of truth, which was nice to have one. And as an additional bonus effect, it also was testable. I got lucky because I started writing tests after we created a banner manager and not before. Because as far as I know, SwiftUI State variables are not actually testable, at least not with unit tests. If you know something about it, please let me know. But for now, I believe that's that. So the banner manager was a very lucky find for me in testing. So let's imagine that we have an imaginary project. It has a main view where we create a banner manager. Then we pass it down some subviews or down some navigation stack, and it works pretty nicely. But each of these projects usually grows quite fast. And each of these subviews also have a few subviews, and some of that subviews are also inside the navigation stack. So you end up with a lot of views through which you need to pass the banner manager for it to reach all the places inside your app. Moreover, not all of these views actually need a banner manager. So now we're in a situation when the views that don't actually use banner manager need to have them so it can be passed down the line, which is less than ideal. And as you can imagine, writing integration tests for this was a bit of a nightmare, honestly, and should be avoided if possible. And that's how we get to the third iteration of the banner manager. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about takeaways of this iteration. So, what not to do when you design an app-wide components? Preferably, if you can, try your best not to change the requirements a lot. I know that it's not always possible, and I know that the requirements change, and sometimes they change by developers, sometimes by stakeholders, sometimes you just rethink the whole concept, and that's fine. But I believe that a little bit of thought beforehand could have saved me a lot of trouble here, because dependency injection was a really great solution to the problem I defined. But I defined the correct problem again. The passing the data was not the only requirement I have. I also needed to be testable and easy to use for the developers, because I would be not the only person who will be using these components, and hopefully it will join BBC libraries, and developers, other developers on the team would be use it as well. So that requirements did not make the cut the first time, and what not to do, not to forget about testing. Obviously, there are some people here who use test-driven development. I admire you. But for everybody else, additional reminder to think about your tests before you start writing and not when you finish the component, because sometimes you have to rewrite the component if you can't test it at the end. The third and spoiler final attempt to create the banner view is named Leveraging the Power of SwiftUI. Because it is, with the help of the power of SwiftUI, I finally managed to create the component, which was easy to use and testable. So that's the current state of the project, as you can see. So we have two view modifiers. The first one needs to be called on the top of the navigation stack in which you want to use the banners. And then in any view inside this navigation stack, you can just call a banner view modifier, pass it some data defining what banner you want to show, and it works. How it works? We created banner manager inside the first view modifier, which is called configure BBC banners, and there we passed banner manager into environment object. And so when the developer later on calls the banner inside the different view, the banner view modifier just gets the banner manager from the environment. There is one obvious downside to it. If developer forgets to call the first view modifier, it crashes. Luckily for me, it is a very obvious crash, and it has a very distinguished arrow, which I put into documentation, and now I just hope for the best that if it crashes, developers always can check the documentation and rather easily figure out why. So that's a good thing. Okay, let's return to our imaginary app and remember in which state we left it. So a lot of different views have banner manager, a lot of views don't need it. It passes all the way through, integrational test nightmare. In current state of the app, if the view doesn't need a banner, it does not interact with the banner. So you don't need to look out for it, you don't need to test it. They are completely banner-free. And the views that actually need banners can use banners. And all they need to pass there is some binding variable of the data, which can be passed down from the view module, from the view. You can use any architecture you like, and it still should work. You don't need to manage the state of the banner manager. That's all happening inside the view modifiers you don't usually have access to, actually. So it is pretty easy to use right now, and it is much easier to test as well. So I can say that for this iteration of the project, my main takeaway was not to ignore the advantages of chosen framework. SwiftUI and UIKit has their strengths and their faults, but when you choose one of them, try to use it to its full potential, because they are amazing frameworks and there is a lot there that can make your life a lot easier. Okay, just quickly to recap what not to do when you create an app-wide component. Do not start looking for the problem before defining don't start looking for a solution before defining the problem, because it will save you a lot of time if you spend a little bit more, one more hour, one more meeting trying to get your requirements for the component right before you start Googling. Try to think about reusability. It's also a very good tip, and it pays off not to solve just the problem that's in front of you at the moment. Trying not to change the requirements is not always possible, but at least I think it's a good idea to strive to this. And not to forget about testing also pays off when you actually need to write this set testing. And at the very end, do not ignore advantages and actually disadvantages of the chosen framework, because new banner view component is very nice and running and working on view modifiers, but what can't we do? We can't use it inside the UIKit views, because there is no way to connect it. And if we have an app where the few screens are SwiftUI and few apps are UIKit, we have different banners now. So I actually have my 2 cents to add to what to do if you are creating an app-wide component. And the first part is really obvious, and I think everybody knows that, but I myself can use a reminder sometimes. So I believe somebody probably here can use it as well. So I decided to leave it there. The second point is to spend more time on assessment and planning, because at the end it will save you some time while thinking about the solution and creating. Add 1 more hour, add 1 more team meeting, it will pay off at the end. And the last but not least, I believe that it's super important to share not only our wins, but our fails with the community. Our failures and what we do with them define how we grow as a developer. Personally, I can recommend creating a conference talk out of 1. So thank you for listening, and hit me up with questions, solutions, and podcast recommendations on the socials.